but I want to get it started. And then, so we'll do this for about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll go back and we'll return to Slumdog Millionaire and read some more of Slumdog Millionaire. But I want to introduce you to who and whom, when to use who, when to use whom, and when to use which. And there are some rules that we follow so that we know that we're doing it correctly. But like every rule in English, for every rule we have in English, there are always many exceptions. And we'll go over those exceptions. And also, when to use who and when to use whom. This is like well, remember before the break I was saying that there are a lot of people who speak English who don't speak it correctly. And when we use who and whom, there are many people who will use who when they should be using whom, and they use whom when they should be using who. And but I want you to learn the right way, okay? I want you to learn the right way. But it's a common mistake that's made in English when we use who and when we use whom. I'm going to try to keep it simple.
Who did you go with? Who did you go with to Cambodia?
Okay. When to use who and when to use which. We're going to cover this first. When to use who, when to use which. Here's the way to keep it real simple. We use who when we're referring to a person. It's a pronoun. It's a pronoun. And we use which when we're referring to a thing, an object. So, an example. The chef who prepared the meal is Australian. Now, I use who because who is referring to the chef. Okay? So who, anytime we need to refer to a person, we use who. See this phrase right here, who prepared the meal? That's modifying or describing the person, chef. Now, when would we use which? The bus, which I took, was number one. Well, which I took is the phrase which modifies, or the clause, which modifies bus. So, since I'm referring to a thing, an object, not a person, I would use which. Simple rule, right? You could. And I got to cover that later, okay? Because there's another rule, like when you use which and when you use that, there's a rule for that. But I don't want to confuse us yet, okay? I want to make sure we get this down first. And then maybe today, maybe Monday, we'll talk about when to use which, when to use that. But there's a reason for when you do one or another. Now, this is where it starts to get a little complicated. We use who when we're referring to the subject of a sentence. Okay? The subject is who's doing the action in a sentence. And we use whom, you pronounce the M on it, whom. Who, whom. Who, whom. Who, whom. We use whom when we're referring to an object of the sentence. Now remember, an object is the receiver of the action. So if I give the marker to Ma, then I am the subject, the marker is the object, and Ma is the object. Because they're receiving the action, I'm actually giving, I'm doing the action. So when we're referring to an object in a sentence who receives the action, we use whom. So here's an example. The chef who prepared the meal, or who prepared our meal, was Australian. So who prepared our meal refers to chef. So we're going to say who. We enjoyed watching the chef, whom was Australian. Now, we are the subject. We enjoyed, that's the verb. What did we enjoy? Well, we enjoyed watching the chef. So we would say whom. Now, like I explained, if you went to a city in America, or England even, but let's say you went to Chicago, big city in America, and you heard someone say, well, we enjoyed watching the chef who was Australian. You'll hear that as often as if you would hear, well, we enjoyed watching the chef whom was Australian. Because it's one of those rules that about a lot of people get wrong. And the point I want to make is that if you went to Chicago and you said, we enjoyed watching the chef who was Australian, most people wouldn't think you said it incorrectly. Now, if you were talking to an English teacher like myself, I would know the difference. But if you were just talking to someone who was not an English teacher, they might not know, they probably wouldn't care. You know, they wouldn't consider it a mistake at all. So it's one of those cases in the language where the rule is not followed by a lot of people, okay? And I want you to understand that, you know, so that it's one of those things that if you're speaking English to an English speaker in America or Canada or Australia, and you use whom incorrectly and say who, they probably won't even know. But if you're talking to an English teacher and you say who, I'd know. I probably wouldn't care, but you know, I just want you to know the right way, but it's one of those things that don't get real worried about it if you get it wrong. Okay, so we would say we enjoyed watching the chef whom was Australian. Now, which, back to which again, which can be used to refer to both the subject of a sentence and the object of a sentence. So we have to know whether we're referring to a subject or an object when we use who or whom. But when we use which, it doesn't matter whether we're referring to the subject or the object. It just doesn't matter at all. So we could say the beach which we visited was in Myanmar, which is referring to the beach. For supper, we ate curry, which was delicious, which refers to curry, which is an object of the sentence. So we don't have to worry when to use which, as whether it's subject. We just, if we need to refer to a thing, we use which. And we don't have to worry whether it's a subject or an object. The only time we have to worry about whether something is a subject or an object is when we decide whether to use who or whom. Okay? Now, I think what we'll do, I'm just going to do a couple for you for practice to just show you, but we're going to practice it because I want to take time to read from our book today. What I'm going to do is Monday when we come back, we'll practice this some more, okay? We'll practice it some more. And I'll also introduce to you when to use which or when to use that on Monday. But I just wanted to let you know kind of where we're going. And I think, you know, this is a little more difficult than what we did earlier today when we talked about regular verbs. And we'll need to practice it some more. But I want us to continue reading too. So, okay? Did you understand what I talked about? Who, whom, which? Okay. How do you know when to use who, and how do you know when to use which? Someone tell me. What's the rule?
Referring to the subject.
Who for the subject? Whom for the object?
Object.
Mm-hmm.
This can use both subject and object.
Which can be used both for a subject and for an object. How do we know whether to use who or which? Who refers to a person, which refers to a thing. Okay. We'll practice it on Monday. We'll get a lot of practice on Monday. Okay.